The dust swirled through the streets of Abilene, Kansas, on that scorching July afternoon in 1873, and Margaret Hayes stood trembling outside the general store with her wedding ring clutched in her palm, wondering if she would even get enough money for a loaf of bread and some dried beans to feed her two young sons. She had never imagined her life would come to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been Margaret Coleman, wife of Thomas Coleman, mother to William and James, living on a modest homestead 15 miles outside of town. Thomas had been a hard-working farmer, determined to make something of their claim despite the harsh Kansas prairie and the unpredictable weather that could bless or curse a family in a single season. He had loved her fiercely, proposed to her in the spring of 1869 when they were both 20 years old, and slipped this simple gold band on her finger with trembling hands and eyes full of hope. They had built a life together, small but full of promise, and she had believed they would grow old watching their children flourish. Then came the winter fever that swept through the county like a dark angel. Thomas had fallen ill in January, burning with fever that no amount of cool cloths or prayers could break. The doctor had come once, taken their last savings, and told Margaret there was nothing more to be done. Thomas died on a frozen February morning with her hand in his, whispering her name as the sun rose pale and cold over the snow-covered fields. He was 24 years old. She had buried him in the small cemetery near the church, her heart as frozen as the ground they had to break to lay him to rest. After Thomas died, everything fell apart like a house of cards in a strong wind. Without his labor, she could not work the fields properly. The spring planting went poorly, and she had no money to hire help. The crops failed. The bank came calling for the mortgage payments she could not make. They took the land, took the house, took everything except the clothes on their backs and the few possessions she could load into a borrowed wagon. She and her boys, William who was 5 and James who was 3, moved into a cramped room above the livery stable in Abilene, where the owner, Mr. Jennings, let her stay in exchange for doing his washing and mending. But the work barely kept them fed, and lately even that was not enough. Now she stood outside Pritchard's general store, her stomach hollow with hunger and shame, ready to sell the last piece of her old life. The ring felt heavy in her hand despite its lightness, weighted with memory and meaning. She could still remember Thomas's face when he placed it on her finger, the way his voice cracked with emotion as he promised to love her forever. Forever had been so short. Margaret pushed open the door, the bell jingling overhead. The store smelled of coffee and leather and pickles in brine. Mr. Pritchard stood behind the counter, his spectacles perched on his nose as he tallied figures in a ledger. He looked up as she approached, and she saw the flicker of pity cross his face. Everyone in town knew her story. She had become that tragic figure that people whispered about, the young widow with 2 small children and nothing to her name. "Mrs. Coleman," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "What can I do for you today?" She opened her palm, revealing the ring. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I need to sell this. I need food for my boys." Mr. Pritchard's expression softened. He reached for the ring, examining it in the light from the window. It was simple gold, worn thin from years of wear, with no precious stones or ornate craftsmanship. Just a plain band that represented a plain life and a love that had been real and true and achingly brief. "Mrs. Coleman, this is worth maybe $3, he said gently. "I can give you that in trade. You can pick out what you need. $3. Her entire marriage, her memories, her last connection to Thomas, worth $3 in dried goods. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry here in public. She had cried enough in private, muffling her sobs in her pillow at night so William and James would not hear their mother breaking apart. "I will take it," she whispered. At that moment, the door opened again and a man walked in. Margaret glanced over and saw a cowboy, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and dust on his clothes that spoke of long days on the trail. He wore a worn hat, a faded blue shirt, and chaps that had seen better days. There was a revolver at his hip and spurs on his boots that jingled softly as he walked. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were a startling shade of blue-gray, like a winter sky. He nodded politely to her, then moved to browse the shelves while Mr. Pritchard went to gather her provisions. Margaret stood at the counter, her hand now empty, feeling the absence of the ring like a phantom limb. She watched Mr. Pritchard measure out flour, wrap up bacon, add some beans and a small bag of cornmeal. $3 worth of survival. "Excuse me, ma'am," a voice said behind her. She turned to find the cowboy standing there, his hat in his hands. Up close she could see he had a kind face, weathered by sun and wind but with a gentleness around his eyes. "I could not help but overhear. You are selling your wedding ring," heat flooded Margaret's cheeks. "I have no choice," she said, lifting her chin defensively. "My boys need to eat." He nodded slowly, no judgment in his expression. "I understand hard times, lost my own family when I was young. Where is your husband, if you do not mind me asking?" "Dead," Margaret said flatly. 6 months ago, fever took him." Something shifted in the cowboy's face, a flash of deep sympathy. "I am sorry for your loss, ma'am. That is a heavy burden to carry." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something, then said, "Would you allow me to buy the ring from you? I would like to give you a fair price for it." Margaret blinked in surprise. Mr. Pritchard already offered $3. The cowboy glanced at the store owner, then back at her. "With respect to Mr. Pritchard, I think your ring is worth more than that. Sentimental value aside, I would like to offer you $20 for it." Margaret's breath caught. $20 was more money than she had seen in months. It would buy food for weeks, pay the rent to Mr. Jennings, maybe even get James some new shoes since he had outgrown his old ones. But something made her hesitate. Why would a stranger offer so much for a simple gold band? "Why?" she asked bluntly. "It is not worth that much, and you know it." The cowboy met her eyes steadily. "Because I can see you need it, ma'am, and because I have been fortunate lately. I just got paid for a cattle drive up from Texas, and I have more money in my pocket than I need for myself. Call it a whim or call it charity if you must, but I would like to buy your ring." Pride warred with desperation in Margaret's chest. She had been raised to be self-sufficient, to work for what she needed, not to accept handouts, but her children were hungry and pride would not fill their bellies. Still, something about this felt wrong, like she was taking advantage of a kind stranger's generosity. "I cannot accept charity," she said quietly. "It is not charity," he replied firmly. "It is a business transaction. You have something to sell and I want to buy it. Simple as that." He pulled out a worn leather wallet from his pocket and counted out $20 in bills and coins. "Here, take it please. Let me do this one good thing today." Margaret looked at the money, then at the cowboy's earnest face, then at the meager pile of provisions on the counter that represented her ring's worth. She thought of William's thin face, of James coughing in the night because he did not have enough to eat to stay strong. She thought of the fear that haunted her every moment, the terror that she would not be able to keep her children alive. "All right," she whispered. Thank you so much." She took the money with shaking hands, and Mr. Pritchard handed over the ring to the cowboy, who slipped it into his vest pocket without even looking at it. Margaret immediately turned back to the store owner. "Mr. Pritchard, I need to change my order. I need more flour and some salt pork and potatoes if you have them, and some milk for the boys, and—" Her voice trailed off as the cowboy touched her arm gently. "Ma'am, if I may suggest something. Why do you not take your original provisions now and come back tomorrow when you have had time to think about what you need most? That money will last longer if you are careful and plan it out." It was sensible advice, the kind Thomas would have given. Margaret nodded, feeling overwhelmed by this stranger's kindness. Yes, you are right. I will do that." Mr. Pritchard handed over the supplies he had already gathered, and Margaret clutched them to her chest. She turned to the cowboy, searching for words adequate to express her gratitude, but everything seemed insufficient. "I do not know how to thank you, sir," she said. You have saved my children's lives today. May I at least know your name?" The cowboy smiled, a slow, genuine expression that lit up his weathered face. "Name is Cole Brennan, ma'am. I am a drover, mostly working cattle drives between Texas and Kansas, and you do not need to thank me, just take care of those boys of yours." "Margaret Coleman," she said, "and I will. I promise I will." She left the store in a daze, her provisions in her arms and money in her pocket, more than she had possessed in months. As she walked back toward the livery stable, she kept touching the coins through the fabric of her dress, making sure they were real, that this was not some desperate dream born of hunger and exhaustion. Back in the tiny room above the stable, William and James looked up eagerly as she entered. William had his father's brown hair and serious eyes, while James was fair like her, with curls that tangled around his small face. They were too thin, both of them, their cheeks hollow and their eyes too large. It broke her heart every time she looked at them. "Mama, did you get food?" James asked, his voice hopeful. "Yes, baby, I did," Margaret said, setting down her packages. "We are going to have a good supper tonight. How about some cornbread and bacon?" The boys' faces lit up with joy, and William actually clapped his hands. It was such a simple thing, a meal that would have been ordinary in their old life, but now it was a feast. As Margaret prepared the food over the small stove in the corner, she found herself thinking about Cole Brennan. She had been so caught up in her own desperation that she had not really looked at him, but now she recalled the details. His kind eyes, his gentle voice, the way he had treated her with respect rather than pity. He had given her $20 for a ring worth $3 and asked nothing in return. In her experience, people did not do things like that without an ulterior motive. But he had seemed genuine, had seemed to truly want to help without expecting anything. She wished she had said more to him, thanked him properly. Maybe she would see him again in town and could express her gratitude better. Or maybe he would move on with the next cattle drive and she would never see him again. The thought gave her an unexpected pang of disappointment. The next morning, Margaret woke early and counted out her money carefully. $20 plus the few coins she had scraped together before. She made a list of what she needed most: flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, lard, potatoes, onions, dried apples, coffee, sugar, milk, and new shoes for James. If she was careful, she could make this last a month, maybe more. It would give her breathing room, time to figure out a better situation for herself and her boys. She left William and James with Mrs. Patterson, the blacksmith's wife who sometimes watched them when Margaret needed to go into town, and walked to Pritchard's general store. The morning was already hot, promising another scorching day. The streets were busy with cowboys and farmers, women shopping, children running and playing. Abilene was a cattle town, rough around the edges but prosperous, full of saloons and businesses catering to the drovers who brought their herds up the Kishom Trail. Margaret was examining sacks of flour when the door opened and Cole Brennan walked in. Her heart gave an unexpected jump. He looked different in the morning light, less dusty, like he had washed up at the bathhouse. He wore clean clothes, dark trousers and a white shirt with a brown vest, and his hair was combed back from his face. He was handsome, she realized with a start. Not in a pretty way, but in a rugged, masculine way that made her suddenly very aware that she was a woman and he was a man. He saw her and smiled, walking over. "Mrs. Coleman, good morning. I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you," Margaret said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Better than I have in weeks, knowing my boys will have enough to eat. I am glad to hear it." He paused, then reached into his vest pocket and pulled out her wedding ring. Margaret's breath caught. "Mrs. Coleman, I bought this from you yesterday, and that was a fair transaction. But I have been thinking about it, and I realize this ring means a great deal more to you than it does to me, so I would like to give it back." Margaret stared at him, unable to process his words. "Give it back, but you paid for it." "I did," Cole agreed, "and now I am choosing to return it." "You should not have to give up something so precious. Please take it." He held out the ring, but Margaret took a step back, shaking her head. No, no, I cannot. You paid me $20. I cannot just take the ring back. That would be stealing from you. It is not stealing if I am giving it freely, Cole said patiently. Mrs. Coleman, Margaret, please. I can see what this ring means to you. It is your connection to your late husband, a symbol of the love you shared. You should not have to sell that, no matter how desperate things are. I want you to have it back. Tears blurred Margaret's vision. I do not understand. Why would you do this? First you pay me far more than the ring is worth, and now you want to give it back. Are you trying to make me feel like a charity case? No, Cole said firmly. I am trying to help someone who is struggling through no fault of her own. I have been where you are, Mrs. Coleman. When I was 14, my parents and my little sister died of cholera. I was left alone with nothing, had to make my own way in the world. I know what it is like to be hungry and scared and desperate, and I know what it is like when someone shows you kindness at your lowest moment. A rancher named Sam Mitchell took me in, gave me work, taught me about cattle and horses. He did not have to do that. He could have sent me on my way like most people did. But he chose to help, and it changed my life. I have never forgotten that. So now, when I see someone who needs help, I try to do what Sam did for me. Please take the ring, let me do this. Margaret looked at the ring glinting in his palm, then at his face. She saw sincerity there and understanding and something else she could not quite name. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took the ring. It felt warm from his pocket, solid and real in her hand. She slipped it back onto her finger where it belonged and felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of grief and fear that had been choking her for months. Thank you, she whispered, and this time the tears spilled over. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me. Cole smiled gently. I think I have some idea. Now, are you stocking up on supplies? Can I help you carry anything? Margaret wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I was making a list of what I need. I have 2 boys to feed, and I am trying to make the money stretch as far as possible. How old are your boys? Cole asked as they walked along the shelves together. William is 5 and James is 3, Margaret said. They are good boys, so good. They do not complain even though I know they are hungry most of the time. William tries to take care of James, and James follows his brother everywhere. They miss their father terribly. I am sure they do, Cole said quietly, and I am sure they are lucky to have such a strong mother fighting for them. Margaret shook her head. I do not feel strong. I feel like I am drowning most days, barely keeping my head above water. That is what strength is, Cole said. Keeping going even when you feel like you are drowning, not giving up even when things seem impossible. You are stronger than you know, Mrs. Coleman. His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for so long. They spent the next hour shopping together, Cole offering advice on what would last longest and give the most nutrition, helping her calculate prices and make decisions. He had a practical knowledge of food and supplies that came from years of trail life, and Margaret found herself grateful for his input. He also insisted on buying a small bag of peppermint candies for William and James, saying that children should have something sweet now and then. When they left the store, Cole helped her carry the supplies back to the livery stable. Margaret felt self-conscious about him seeing where she lived, but he showed no sign of judgment as he climbed the narrow stairs to the room above. He set down the sacks of flour and cornmeal, looked around the cramped space with its single narrow bed where she and the boys slept together, the tiny stove, the few possessions she had managed to keep. It is not much, Margaret said defensively, but it is better than nothing. It is clean and dry, Cole observed. That is more than I have most nights, sleeping under the stars or in a dusty bunkhouse. You have made it a home. Margaret looked around, trying to see it through his eyes. She had hung a faded curtain at the window, had arranged her few dishes neatly on a crate that served as a shelf, had folded the blankets carefully on the bed. Small touches to maintain dignity and normalcy for her sons. Mr. Brennan, she said impulsively, would you like to stay for supper? It is the least I can do after all your kindness. I know it will not be fancy, but… Cole smiled. I would be honored, Mrs. Coleman. Thank you. That evening, Margaret cooked a simple meal of beans and cornbread and salt pork, stretching her ingredients to feed 4 instead of 3. William and James were shy at first around the tall stranger, hiding behind their mother's skirts, but Cole sat down on the floor at their level and talked to them gently about horses and cattle, about the stars at night on the prairie, about a funny incident where a longhorn steer got loose in a town and chased a banker down the street. Soon the boys were laughing, their initial wariness forgotten. Margaret watched as Cole gave William and James the peppermint candies, saw how his face softened when James climbed into his lap to hear another story. He was good with children, patient and kind, and it made her heart ache because it reminded her of Thomas, who had loved their boys so much. But it also made her aware of Cole as himself, not just as a kind stranger but as a man who might have depths she had not yet seen. After the boys were asleep, curled together on the bed, Margaret and Cole sat by the window talking quietly. He told her about his life on the trail, the harsh conditions and long hours, the camaraderie among the drovers and the satisfaction of getting a herd safely to market. She told him about her marriage to Thomas, about their dreams for the homestead, about how everything fell apart after he died. "I do not know what I am going to do," Margaret admitted. "This money you gave me will help, but it will not last forever. I need to find a way to support my boys properly. Mr. Jennings is kind to let me stay here, but I cannot do his washing forever. I need something more stable." Cole was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "Have you thought about remarrying? I know it has not been long since your husband passed, but a woman alone with children faces hard prospects in this world." Margaret stiffened. "I have had offers," she said shortly. "Mr. Pritchard's cousin, who is 50 years old and has 6 children of his own who need a mother. And Bill Thompson, who owns the saloon, who made it clear he wanted more than just a wife, if you understand my meaning. I have no interest in marrying someone I do not love or someone who sees me as a convenience or worse." "I understand," Cole said quickly. "I did not mean to suggest you should settle for something less than you deserve. You loved your husband, and that kind of love is rare. You should not have to compromise." Margaret looked down at the ring on her finger, turning it slowly. "Thomas and I were not wealthy or important. We did not have much, but we loved each other truly and we were happy. I miss that. I miss having someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone who cares about the small details of my life. I miss being a wife, being part of a partnership. But I will not marry just for security or respectability. I would rather struggle alone than be trapped in a loveless marriage." "That takes courage," Cole said softly. "Most people choose the safe path even if it makes them miserable. What about you?" Margaret asked, turning the question back on him. "Why has a man like you never married? You are kind and hardworking, and you are good with children. Surely women have been interested." Cole laughed, a bit self-consciously. "I have been moving around too much to settle down. The trail is no life for a wife and family. I have thought about it, about finding a place to put down roots, but the timing never seemed right, and I have not met a woman who made me want to change my ways." He paused, then added quietly, "Until maybe now." Margaret's breath caught. She looked at him and saw something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. There was attraction there, interest, and it awakened something in her that had been dormant since Thomas died. She had not thought of herself as a woman in months, only as a mother and a widow struggling to survive. But now, sitting here with Cole in the quiet evening, she felt feminine awareness stir inside her. "You barely know me," she said, her voice coming out more breathless than she intended. "I know enough," Cole said. "I know you are strong and loving and fiercely protective of your children. I know you have integrity, that you would rather starve than compromise your principles. I know you loved your husband deeply and are mourning him still. Those are the things that matter." "Cole," Margaret whispered, "I cannot, it is too soon. Thomas has been gone only 6 months, people would talk." "Let them talk," Cole said. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Margaret. I am just saying that I would like to spend more time with you to get to know you better. I am in Abilene for at least another week before I need to head back to Texas." We could see each other, talk, just be friends if that is all you want. No pressure, no expectations. Margaret wanted to say no, wanted to protect herself and her fragile heart. But she also wanted to say yes, wanted the warmth and companionship he offered. She was so lonely, had been lonely even before Thomas died because grief had isolated them in those final months. The idea of having someone to talk to, someone who seemed to genuinely care, was almost irresistible. "All right," she said finally. "We can be friends." "But that is all it can be right now. I cannot promise more than that." "Friends is a good start," Cole said, smiling. "I will take it." Over the next week, Cole became a regular presence in Margaret's life. He came by each day, sometimes bringing small gifts like fresh bread from the bakery or a newspaper for her to read. He played with William and James, teaching them to tie knots and whittle simple shapes from wood. He helped Margaret with chores, mending things around the room that needed fixing, carrying heavy loads, doing the kinds of tasks that were easier with a man's strength. Margaret found herself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that both pleased and frightened her. She liked the way he made her laugh, the way he listened when she talked, the way he treated her boys like they mattered. She liked his quiet strength, his gentle humor, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She liked the way he looked at her, like she was someone worth seeing, not just a desperate widow to be pitied. But guilt gnawed at her too. How could she be having these feelings when Thomas was barely cold in his grave? What kind of wife moved on so quickly? She tried to remind herself that she was not moving on, that she and Cole were just friends, but she knew she was lying to herself. There was something growing between them, something that felt like the beginning of love, and it terrified her. One afternoon, Cole took them all on a picnic outside of town. He borrowed a wagon from a friend, loaded it with a basket of food, and drove them out to a spot by a creek where cottonwood trees provided shade. William and James ran around catching grasshoppers and throwing stones in the water while Margaret and Cole sat on a blanket watching them. "They are beautiful boys," Cole said. "You should be proud." "I am," Margaret said. "They are the reason I keep going. Without them, I do not know what I would have done after Thomas died." Cole reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond helping her carry something or guiding her elbow, and the contact sent warmth spreading through her. His hand was calloused and strong, weathered from years of hard work, and it made her feel safe. "Margaret, I need to tell you something," he said seriously. "I have to leave in 2 days. The cattle company is organizing another drive and they want me to head back to Texas to help with the roundup. I will be gone for at least 3 months. Margaret's heart sank. She had known this moment was coming, but she had tried not to think about it. "I see. But I want to come back," Cole continued. "When the drive is over, I want to come back to Abilene. I want to see you again, to spend more time with you and the boys, if that is something you would want too." Margaret looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. She saw hope there and vulnerability, and it made her brave. "Yes," she said. "I would like that very much." Cole's face broke into a wide smile. "Then I will come back, I promise. And while I am gone, I want you to write to me. Tell me how you and the boys are doing. The cattle company has an office here in town where you can leave letters, and they will get them to me eventually." "I will write," Margaret promised. "And you write to me too. Tell me about the trail, about where you are." They spent the rest of the afternoon together, and when Cole drove them back to town that evening, Margaret felt like something had shifted between them. They had not kissed, had not made any grand declarations, but there was an understanding now, an acknowledgement that what they felt was real and worth pursuing. The night before Cole left, he came to say goodbye. The boys hugged him and made him promise to come back, and he ruffled their hair and told them to take care of their mother. Then he and Margaret stood together in the doorway, neither wanting to say the words that would make his leaving real. 3 months, Cole said. Maybe less if the weather cooperates and the drive goes smooth. "I will be here," Margaret said. "We will be waiting for you." Cole reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. You have given me something I did not know I was missing, Margaret Coleman. Something to look forward to, something to come back to. Thank you for that." Margaret covered his hand with hers. "You gave me hope when I had none. You reminded me that there are still good people in the world, that there is still kindness. I will never forget that." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she did not. His lips brushed hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was nothing like the passionate kisses she had shared with Thomas, but it was good in its own way, a beginning rather than a continuation. When he pulled back, his eyes were warm. "I will come back," he said again. "I swear it." Then he was gone, and Margaret stood in the doorway watching him walk away until he disappeared into the darkness. She touched her lips, feeling the ghost of his kiss, and allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, her story was not over. Maybe there was a second chance waiting for her, a new love that would not replace what she had with Thomas, but would honor it by showing her that her heart was still capable of opening. The next 3 months were the longest of Margaret's life. She worked hard, taking on extra washing and mending to keep money coming in, carefully managing the funds Cole had given her to make them stretch. She wrote letters to him, long, rambling accounts of her days, of William starting to learn his letters and James finally getting over a cough that had worried her. She told him about the changing seasons, about the first frost and the leaves turning gold, about small victories and daily struggles. Cole's letters came sporadically, sometimes 3 at once when the supply wagon made its way to where the drive was, sometimes weeks with nothing. But when they came, Margaret treasured them, reading them over and over until she knew them by heart. He wrote about the trail, about storms and river crossings and near disasters with stampedes. He wrote about the stars at night and the beauty of the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions. And he wrote about missing her, about thinking of her smile and her laugh, and the way she looked at her boys with such fierce love. As the weeks passed, Margaret felt her grief for Thomas softening. It would never go away completely, but it was changing, becoming less of a sharp pain and more of a tender ache. She would always love him, would always be grateful for the years they had together, but she was beginning to understand that loving him did not mean she could not love again. Thomas would have wanted her to be happy, would have wanted their boys to have a father. He had been that kind of man, generous and loving, and she honored his memory by choosing to live fully rather than remaining trapped in sorrow. Mrs. Patterson, the blacksmith's wife, became a good friend during those months. She was a pragmatic woman with 4 grown children of her own, and she had watched Margaret's situation with sympathy. One afternoon over tea, she said bluntly, "So when is that cowboy coming back for you?" Margaret felt herself blush. "His name is Cole Brennan, and he should be back by November if the cattle drive went well. And when he comes back, what are you going to do?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Marry him, I hope. That man is head over heels for you, and you are for him too, even if you are trying to pretend otherwise." "It has only been 8 months since Thomas died," Margaret said quietly. "People will think badly of me if I remarry so soon." Mrs. Patterson snorted. "Let them think what they want. You are a young woman with 2 small children and no way to support yourself properly. If you have found a good man who loves you and will take care of your boys, you would be a fool not to grab hold of him with both hands. Thomas would understand. Any decent husband would want his wife to find happiness again." Margaret knew she was right, but fear still held her back. What if Cole changed his mind? What if he did not come back? What if she opened her heart fully and then lost him too? She did not know if she could survive that kind of pain again. But November came, and with it a letter from Cole saying he would be back in Abilene by the 20th. Margaret read the letter so many times the paper grew soft and creased. She found herself watching the calendar, counting down the days, her heart beating faster every time she heard boots on the stairs outside her door. November 20th arrived gray and cold, with a sharp wind blowing down from the north that promised winter was coming. Margaret kept herself busy all day, but her mind was elsewhere, wondering if Cole would really come, if he had meant what he said, or if the trail had changed him. Evening fell and she lit the lamp, helped the boys with their supper, tried to focus on mending a shirt. William and James kept asking when Cole would arrive, and she had to tell them she did not know, maybe not until tomorrow, maybe not for days. Then there was a knock at the door, and Margaret's heart leaped into her throat. She opened it to find Cole standing there, his hat in his hands and a smile on his face that made her knees weak. He looked thinner, more weathered, exhausted from the long trail, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Margaret," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. "Cole," she whispered, and then she was in his arms, held tight against his chest, breathing in the smell of him that was dust and horses and leather and something uniquely his own. She felt him trembling, or maybe she was the one trembling, she could not tell. All she knew was that he was here, he had come back just as he promised, and the relief and joy were almost overwhelming. William and James rushed over, grabbing onto Cole's legs, shouting with excitement. He laughed and released Margaret to scoop up the boys, one in each arm, spinning them around until they giggled. Margaret stood back and watched, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was what a family looked like. This was what love looked like. Not the young, passionate love she had shared with Thomas, but something deeper and steadier, built on friendship and respect and genuine caring. After the boys finally settled down, Cole sat with them and told stories about the trail while Margaret made coffee. When William and James finally fell asleep, worn out from excitement, Cole and Margaret sat together in the small space, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I missed you," Cole said quietly. "Every day I was gone, I thought about you, about this moment, coming back and seeing you again." "I missed you too," Margaret admitted, "more than I thought possible. I kept rereading your letters, kept wondering if you were safe." "I am safe," Cole said, "and I am here and I do not want to leave again. Margaret, I have been thinking about this for months. I have some money saved up from the drives. Not a lot, but enough to make a start. I want to buy a piece of land, start a small ranch, settle down, and I want to do it here near Abilene so I can be close to you, if that is all right with you." Margaret turned to look at him. "You would give up the trail for me." "I would give up anything for you," Cole said simply. "I have spent 12 years moving from place to place, never putting down roots, and I am tired of it. I want a home, I want a family. I want to wake up in the same place every morning and see the same faces and build something that lasts. And I want to do that with you if you will have me." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Cole, I care for you so much, but I am afraid. I lost Thomas and it nearly destroyed me. If I let myself love you fully and then something happens to you, I do not know if I could survive it." Cole took her hands in his. "I cannot promise nothing bad will ever happen. Life does not work that way. But I can promise that I will do everything in my power to stay safe, to come home to you every night, to grow old with you. And even if tragedy strikes, would you rather have never loved at all? Would you rather have spent your life alone to avoid the possibility of pain?" Margaret thought about Thomas, about the brief, beautiful years they had together. Would she trade those years to avoid the pain of losing him? Never. Those years had given her William and James, had given her joy and love and a sense of belonging. The pain of losing him was terrible, but it was the price of having loved him, and she would pay it again without hesitation. "No," she said softly, "I would not trade love to avoid pain." "Then take a chance on me," Cole said. "Let me love you, let me be a father to your boys. Let me give you the life you deserve. I am not asking you to forget Thomas or to replace him. I am just asking you to make room in your heart for me too." Margaret looked at the ring on her finger, the symbol of her first love. Then she looked at Cole's face, at the hope and vulnerability there, and she made her choice. She leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and tentative love into it. He kissed her back with a tenderness that made her feel cherished, valued, safe. When they pulled apart, Cole was smiling. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," Margaret said. "Yes, I will take a chance on you. Yes, I will let you love me. Yes to all of it." Cole pulled her close, holding her like she was something precious. They sat together in the lamplight, making quiet plans for the future, talking about land and houses and what kind of life they wanted to build together. Margaret felt lighter than she had in a year, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was still a widow, still poor, still facing an uncertain future. But she was no longer alone, and that made all the difference. Cole stayed in Abilene that winter, working odd jobs and saving money while he courted Margaret properly. He came to supper every night, played with the boys, helped Margaret with chores. He held her hand when they walked through town together, kissed her goodnight at the door, made her feel like a woman again instead of just a struggling widow. People did talk, of course, about how quickly she was moving on, but Margaret found she did not care. Let them talk. She knew her own heart, knew that what she felt for Cole was real and good. On Christmas Eve, Cole took Margaret and the boys to see a piece of land he had found. It was 10 miles outside of town, 160 acres with a creek running through it and good grazing for cattle. There was no house yet, just empty prairie, but Cole painted a picture with his words of what it could be. A home with a big kitchen and a porch where they could sit in the evenings. A barn for horses and milk cows, corrals for cattle, room for William and James to run and play, a garden for Margaret to grow vegetables, a life built with their own hands. "I can buy this land," Cole said. "I have enough saved for the down payment. It will take years to build it up into a real ranch, but we can do it. Together, we can make this into something good." Margaret looked around at the snow-dusted prairie, at the vast sky overhead, at the faces of her boys bright with excitement. She looked at Cole standing beside her, strong and steady and sure. And she knew this was where she belonged, not in the cramped room above the livery stable, not in the past mourning what she had lost, but here in the present building something new. "Yes," she said, "let us do it. Let us build a life here." Cole whooped with joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while William and James cheered. When he set her down, breathless and laughing, he pulled a small box from his pocket and dropped to one knee in the snow. "Margaret Coleman, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love you and your boys, to work hard and provide for you, to be faithful and true all the days of my life. I promise to honor the memory of your first husband and never try to replace him, but to be the best man I can be for you. Will you marry me?" Margaret looked down at him, this good man who had walked into her life when she had nothing and given her everything. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." The ring he slipped on her finger was simple silver because he had spent his savings on the land, but Margaret did not care. She wore it alongside her gold wedding band, 2 rings representing 2 loves, both precious and real. Cole stood and kissed her while the boys danced around them in the snow, and Margaret felt a joy so profound it bordered on pain. She had not thought she could feel this way again, had not thought her heart was capable of opening after being so thoroughly broken. But love, she was learning, was resilient. It could survive loss and pain and still bloom again when given the right conditions. They married in January of 1874, a small, simple ceremony at the church with Mrs. Patterson and her husband as witnesses. Margaret wore her best dress, faded but clean, with a shawl Cole had bought her as a wedding gift. Cole wore a new suit that made him look almost like a stranger, formal and handsome. William and James stood beside them, solemn and proud to be part of the ceremony. The minister asked if Margaret took Cole to be her lawfully wedded husband, and she said yes with her whole heart. She meant the vows she spoke, promising to love and honor and cherish, because she knew now what those words really meant, what marriage really was. It was not just romance and passion. It was partnership and friendship, showing up for each other day after day, choosing love even when things were hard. After the ceremony, they had a small celebration at the boarding house where Cole had been staying. Mrs. Patterson had made a cake, and other friends from town brought food and well wishes. Margaret stood beside her new husband, her hand in his, and felt grateful beyond measure. A year ago, she had been selling her wedding ring for food, desperate and alone. Now she was married to a good man who loved her, with a piece of land to call their own and a future stretching out bright with possibility. That night, in the room Cole had rented for them at the boarding house while the boys slept in another room under Mrs. Patterson's watchful eye, Margaret became Cole's wife in every sense. She was nervous at first, feeling disloyal to Thomas's memory, but Cole was patient and tender, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. And when they came together, Margaret felt something shift inside her, a final letting go of the past and an embrace of the present. She was no longer Thomas's widow. She was Cole's wife, and that was a new identity, a new beginning. They spent the winter preparing for their move to the land. Cole worked with other men to build a small cabin, just 4 rooms but solid and warm, with a real glass window and a stone fireplace. Margaret sewed curtains and saved money for furniture, planning out her garden and dreaming of the future. William and James were excited about the move, asking endless questions about whether they would have chickens, and could they learn to ride horses, and would they get a dog. In April of 1874, they moved onto their land. The cabin was finished, basic but sturdy, and Cole had built a small barn and some corrals. He bought 6 head of cattle to start his herd and a milk cow for Margaret and some chickens. It was not much, but it was theirs, earned through hard work and sacrifice and determination. Margaret threw herself into making the cabin a home. She unpacked their few belongings, arranged the furniture Cole had built, planted her garden. She cooked meals in her own kitchen, hung washing on a line outside, swept the porch every morning. It was the life she had dreamed of with Thomas, now made real with Cole. Sometimes she felt guilty about that, felt like she was betraying Thomas's memory by being happy with another man. But mostly she felt grateful that she had been given a second chance at love and family. Cole worked from sunup to sundown, building up the ranch. He mended fences, tended cattle, broke horses, did all the backbreaking labor required to make a homestead prosper. Margaret helped when she could, working alongside him while the boys played nearby. It was hard work, exhausting and sometimes discouraging, but they did it together, and that made all the difference. At night, after the boys were asleep, Margaret and Cole would sit on the porch and watch the stars come out. Cole would put his arm around her and she would lean into his warmth, feeling content in a way she had not felt in years. They would talk about their day, make plans for the future, or sometimes just sit in comfortable silence. These were the moments Margaret treasured most, the quiet intimacy of a shared life. One night in early summer, as they sat watching fireflies dance in the darkness, Margaret said, "I need to tell you something." Cole looked at her, concern flickering across his face. "What is it?" "I am going to have a baby," Margaret said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know we have only been married 6 months and we have so much to do still, and I do not know if we are ready, but—" Cole cut off her rambling by kissing her soundly. When he pulled back, he was grinning from ear to ear. "We are going to have a baby, Margaret, that is wonderful news. Why would you think I would be anything but thrilled?" "Because things are already so hard," Margaret said. "We are barely making ends meet, and a baby will be another mouth to feed, and I will not be able to work as much, and—" "We will manage," Cole said firmly. "We always manage, and this baby is a blessing, Margaret, a symbol of our love, of the life we are building together. I could not be happier." Margaret felt tears of relief and joy spill over. "Truly, truly," Cole said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby, I am going to be a father." "You are already a father," Margaret reminded him. "William and James love you like you are their real father." "And I love them like they are my real sons," Cole said. "But this is different. This baby will be ours from the very beginning, yours and mine together. It feels like a miracle." Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder. "You have given me so many miracles, Cole Brennan. You walked into my life when I had nothing, when I was ready to give up, and you gave me hope. You gave me love, you gave me a future. I do not know how I got so lucky." "I am the lucky one," Cole said softly. I spent years drifting, never belonging anywhere, never finding a place that felt like home. Then I met you and suddenly I knew exactly where I was supposed to be. Right here with you, building this life. You and the boys and this baby, you are my home, Margaret. You always will be. They sat together in the warm night air, planning and dreaming, talking about names for the baby and whether they should add another room to the cabin. Margaret felt a peace settle over her, deep and abiding. Her life had not turned out the way she had planned. She had lost Thomas, had suffered and struggled and nearly broken. But she had survived, and in surviving she had found something she had not expected. A second love, different from the first but no less real. A second chance at happiness, at family, at building a life that mattered. The pregnancy was not easy. Margaret was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down, exhausted all the time. Cole took over many of her chores, caring for the boys and cooking meals while she rested. William and James were excited about having a baby brother or sister, and they helped as much as 5- and 7-year-olds could, fetching things for their mother and trying to be quiet when she needed to sleep. As summer turned to fall, Margaret's belly grew round and the baby became more real. She felt it moving inside her, little flutters at first and then strong kicks that made Cole laugh with delight when he felt them. They prepared a cradle, assembled from wood Cole had carefully shaped and sanded smooth. Margaret sewed tiny clothes, marveling at how small they were, remembering when William and James had been this little. In November of 1874, Margaret went into labor. Mrs. Patterson came out to the ranch to help, along with another neighbor woman who had experience with birthing. Cole paced outside, too nervous to stay in the room, while William and James huddled together on the porch wondering what all the commotion was about. The labor was long and difficult. Margaret gritted her teeth through the pain, bearing down when told to, trying to breathe through the contractions that felt like they were tearing her apart. She had done this twice before with Thomas, but somehow she had forgotten how much it hurt, how exhausting it was, how frightening. At one point she cried out for Cole, needing him, and Mrs. Patterson reluctantly let him into the room. Cole took Margaret's hand, his face pale but determined. "I am here," he said. "I am right here, you can do this. You are the strongest person I know." Margaret clung to his hand, drawing strength from his presence. With Cole beside her, she felt like she could do anything, even this. She pushed when Mrs. Patterson told her to push, bore down with every ounce of strength she had left, and finally, she heard a baby's cry. "It is a boy." Mrs. Patterson announced, holding up a tiny, squalling infant. "A beautiful, healthy boy," Cole laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. Margaret reached for the baby and Mrs. Patterson placed him in her arms, all red-faced and wrinkled and perfect. Margaret looked down at her son, at Cole's son, and felt love overwhelm her. This tiny person was half her and half Cole, a physical manifestation of their love. "He is perfect," Cole whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son, Margaret knew exactly what his name should be. "Samuel," she said. "After the man who helped you when you were alone, Samuel Thomas, to honor both the past and the future." Cole's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel Thomas Brennan. It is perfect. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for this gift." Samuel was a fussy baby, colicky and demanding, keeping Margaret and Cole up most nights with his crying, but they did not mind. They took turns walking him, bouncing him, singing to him, exhausted but happy. William and James were fascinated by their new brother, wanting to hold him and help take care of him. Margaret watched Cole with the baby and fell in love with him all over again. He was so gentle, so patient, cradling Samuel like he was made of glass, talking to him in a soft voice completely besotted. The winter was hard. Snow came early and deep, trapping them on the ranch for weeks at a time. Supplies ran low and Margaret rationed carefully, making every bit of flour and cornmeal stretch. The cattle suffered in the cold, and Cole spent hours every day breaking ice on the creek so they could drink, feeding them hay he had put up in the summer. It was back-breaking work, and there were times when Margaret wondered if they would make it, if the ranch would survive its first winter. But they did make it, through sheer determination and stubbornness and refusal to give up. Spring came eventually, melting the snow and turning the prairie green. The cattle survived, thin but alive. The garden sprouted. Samuel grew bigger and healthier, losing his colicky fussiness and becoming a happy baby who smiled and cooed. William and James ran wild in the spring sunshine, growing brown and strong. Cole's cattle herd grew over the next few years through careful management and hard work. He bought more land when he could afford it, expanding the ranch bit by bit. Margaret's garden flourished, providing vegetables that she canned for winter. They bought pigs and more chickens. The cabin expanded with an additional room that became a proper bedroom for the boys. Life was still hard, still full of challenges and setbacks, but they were building something real and lasting. In the spring of 1876, Margaret discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less of a shock, more of a joyful expectation. Samuel was 1.5 years old, toddling around and getting into everything, and the idea of another baby seemed natural. Cole was delighted, though he worried about Margaret's health since the first pregnancy had been so difficult, but this pregnancy was easier. Margaret was sick for only a few weeks, and then she felt strong and healthy. She worked in the garden, cared for the boys, helped Cole with ranch chores. Her belly grew round again, and they prepared for another addition to the family. In December of 1876, Margaret gave birth to a daughter. The labor was shorter this time, only a few hours, and though it hurt, it did not have the terror of the first time. When Mrs. Patterson placed the baby girl in Margaret's arms, Margaret looked down at her daughter's tiny, perfect face and felt complete. "A girl," Cole said wonderingly, touching the baby's dark hair. "We have a daughter. What should we call her?" Margaret had thought about this during the pregnancy. "I would like to name her Grace," she said. "Because that is what you gave me, Cole, grace when I needed it most. A second chance, an undeserved gift. Grace is the perfect name." "Grace Brennan," Cole said, testing the name. "It is beautiful, just like her mother." They settled into a new rhythm with 4 children. William was now 9, serious and responsible, helping Cole with ranch work. James was 7, more playful and mischievous but hardworking when needed. Samuel was 2, learning to talk and exploring everything. And Grace was a sweet baby, easier than Samuel had been, content to sleep and eat and be held. Margaret sometimes felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work required to care for 4 children and help run a ranch. There were meals to cook and clothes to wash and mend, children to tend and teach, a garden to manage, chickens to feed, butter to churn, bread to bake. The work was endless, exhausting, and sometimes she collapsed into bed at night too tired to even talk to Cole. But there were also moments of profound joy. Watching William help his father mend a fence, patient and careful, seeing James teach Samuel to catch frogs by the creek, holding Grace while she slept, her tiny fingers wrapped around Margaret's thumb. Sitting at the supper table with her whole family, listening to them talk and laugh together. These moments made everything worthwhile. One evening in the summer of 1878, after the children were all in bed, Margaret and Cole sat on the porch as they often did. The night was warm and filled with the sounds of crickets and frogs. Margaret leaned against Cole's shoulder, feeling peaceful and content. "Do you ever think about how different your life might have been?" Cole asked. "If Thomas had not died, if I had never come to Abilene, if you had not been selling that ring," Margaret considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I think about what my life with Thomas would have been like. We would have more children probably, would have made the original homestead work somehow. It would have been a good life, I think." "Do you regret this life instead?" Cole asked, and Margaret heard the vulnerability in his voice. She turned to look at him. "Never," she said firmly. "Cole, I loved Thomas with all my heart. He was my first love, and I will always cherish the time we had together. But that life ended and I had to find a new way forward, and I found you. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I thought I could never love again, a future when I thought I had none. This life with you is different from what I had with Thomas, but it is just as good, just as precious. I do not regret a single moment. Cole pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. I think about that day in Pritchard's store sometimes. What made me speak up, made me offer to buy that ring? I almost did not. I almost just bought my supplies and left. But something made me say something, and it changed my entire life. The best decision I ever made was buying that ring from you. And giving it back, Margaret reminded him, touching the gold band that still sat on her finger alongside her silver wedding ring from Cole. That was what made me believe you were different, that you were someone special. You could have kept it, could have just walked away, but you gave it back because you understood what it meant to me. That is when I started falling in love with you, I think. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you, Cole confessed. Standing in that store, so proud despite your desperation, so determined to provide for your boys no matter what it cost you. You took my breath away. I kept telling myself I just wanted to help, that I was just being kind, but the truth is I was already half in love with you before I even knew your name. Margaret laughed softly. We have come a long way from that day. We have, Cole agreed, and we still have a long way to go. This ranch will not build itself. We have children to raise, a future to secure. But I am looking forward to every moment of it as long as I get to spend it with you. They sat together in the warm night, holding hands, watching the stars come out one by one. Margaret thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the depths of despair to this moment of perfect contentment. She had lost so much, suffered so deeply, but she had also gained more than she ever imagined possible. A husband who loved her, children who brought her joy, a home that was truly hers. She had been given a second chance at happiness, and she had taken it with both hands and built something beautiful from it. The years passed in the way years do, each one bringing its own challenges and blessings. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Cole's herd grew to over 100 head of cattle. He hired help during roundup and branding, paying cowboys to work the cattle while he managed the operation. The cabin was expanded again, becoming a proper house with 5 bedrooms and a large kitchen where Margaret cooked meals for her growing family and whatever hands Cole employed. William grew into a tall, serious young man who loved working the ranch with his father. He had Thomas's coloring and Margaret's determination, and Cole taught him everything he knew about cattle and horses and managing land. James was more interested in books and learning, and Margaret made sure he got schooling when the traveling teacher came through the area. Samuel was the wild one, always climbing trees and getting into scrapes, but sweet-natured and loving. Grace was thoughtful and careful, more mature than her years, often helping Margaret with the younger children, because there were younger children. Margaret gave birth to another son in 1879, whom they named Daniel, and twin girls in 1882, Emma and Caroline. The house was full of noise and chaos and love, and though Margaret sometimes felt exhausted by the sheer volume of work required to care for so many children, she would not have changed it for anything. Cole was a wonderful father, patient and firm, teaching his children to work hard and be honest and treat others with respect. He made no distinction between William and James, who were not his biological sons, and the children he and Margaret had together. They were all his children, all equally loved and valued. William and James called him Pa, and they meant it. Thomas's memory was honored in their home, talked about openly so the boys would know their birth father, but Cole was the father they knew and loved in the present. In 1885, when William turned 20, he announced that he wanted to start his own homestead on a piece of land adjacent to Cole's ranch. It was a bittersweet moment for Margaret, proud of her son's independence, but sad to see him leaving home. Cole helped William build a cabin and gave him a dozen head of cattle to start his own herd, and William worked hard to prove himself. A year later, he married a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and Margaret attended the wedding with tears in her eyes, remembering when she had been that young bride full of hope and dreams. James decided he wanted to become a teacher, and at 19 he left the ranch to attend a normal school in the East. It was hard for Margaret to let him go, hard to watch him board the train knowing she might not see him for years. But she was proud of him too, proud that he was following his dreams and making something of himself. The other children grew and changed. Samuel showed an aptitude for training horses, and Cole encouraged his talent, teaching him everything he knew. Grace was drawn to music, and Cole bought her a piano that had to be shipped all the way from St. Louis, an extravagant expense but worth it to see her face light up. Daniel, Emma, and Caroline were still young, but each showed their own unique personalities and talents. Margaret watched her children grow with pride and occasional sadness. They were not babies anymore, not dependent on her for everything. They were becoming their own people, making their own choices, building their own lives. It was what she wanted for them, what every parent wanted, but it was hard to let go. Through it all, her relationship with Cole remained strong. They had built their marriage on friendship and respect, and those foundations held firm through the years. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still talked about everything and nothing, still reached for each other in the night. The passion of their early years had settled into something deeper and more enduring, a love that was tested and proven through years of partnership. In the spring of 1890, Margaret stood in the doorway of their home, watching Cole work with Samuel and Daniel in the corral, breaking a new horse. Grace was practicing piano inside, the music drifting out through the open windows. Emma and Caroline were in the garden, supposedly weeding but mostly playing. It was an ordinary day, nothing special, but Margaret felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. 20 years ago, she had been standing in a general store, selling her wedding ring for food, certain her life was over. She had been a desperate widow with no future, no hope, nothing but her love for her two small sons keeping her going. And then Cole Brennan had walked through that door and changed everything. He had bought her ring and given it back. Such a simple gesture, but it had contained multitudes. It had said, "I see you. I see your pain and your strength and your worth. I want to help you, not because I pity you, but because you deserve help." It had been an act of grace, unexpected and unearned, and it had opened the door to everything that came after. Margaret touched the two rings on her finger, gold and silver, past and present, first love and second chance. She had been blessed twice in her life with good men who loved her truly. Thomas had given her those first beautiful years, had given her William and James, had shown her what marriage could be. Cole had given her a future when she thought she had none, had given her more children and a home and a life filled with purpose and love. Some people only got one great love in their lifetime. She had been given two, and she was grateful for both. She did not have to choose between them or rank them or feel guilty about one because of the other. They were both real, both precious, both part of who she was. Cole looked up from the corral and saw her standing there. He smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years, and waved. Margaret waved back, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude and contentment. Life had not been easy. There had been hard times, crop failures and cattle disease and winter storms that tested their endurance. There had been illnesses and injuries and close calls. There had been moments when Margaret wondered if they would make it, if the ranch would survive, if they could keep going. But they had made it, through determination and hard work, and their refusal to give up on each other or the life they were building. Now, standing on the porch of their home, surrounded by the evidence of their labor and love, Margaret knew it had all been worth it. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt and fear had led to this. A family that was strong and healthy and happy. A ranch that was prosperous and growing. A marriage that had weathered every storm and come out stronger. That evening, after the children were fed and the younger ones put to bed, Margaret and Cole took their usual places on the porch. The spring air was mild and sweet, full of the scent of new grass and blooming wildflowers. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying each other's presence. "You were deep in thought today," Cole observed. "Anything you want to talk about?" Margaret smiled. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since we met, how different my life is now from what it was then." "Better, I hope," Cole said with a teasing smile. "So much better," Margaret assured him. "Cole, I need you to know something. I need you to know how grateful I am for you, for everything you have done for me and my boys. You did not have to take on a widow with 2 children. You could have had an easier life with someone else. But you chose us, and you have never made me feel like that was a burden or a sacrifice. You have loved William and James like they were your own, and you have given me more children and more love than I ever dreamed possible. You saved my life in every way that matters." Cole reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Margaret, you saved my life too. I was drifting before I met you, moving from place to place with no real purpose or direction. I had money and work, but I did not have a home. I did not have love. You gave me that. You gave me a reason to settle down, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. If anyone did the saving, it was you." "Then maybe we saved each other," Margaret said softly. "Maybe we did," Cole agreed. He pulled her closer and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I meant what I said that day in the store, you know, when I said I wanted to do one good thing. Helping you, loving you, building this life with you, it has been the best thing I ever did. Everything good in my life comes from that decision to speak up, to offer to buy that ring. I will never regret it." "I will never regret accepting your help," Margaret said. "My pride almost made me refuse, you know. I almost turned you down, told you I did not need charity. But something made me say yes, and I am so glad I did. You gave me back my ring, but more than that, you gave me back myself. You reminded me that I was more than just my circumstances, more than just a desperate widow. You saw me as a person worthy of respect and kindness, and that changed everything." They sat together as darkness fell, talking about the past and the present and the future. They talked about William's homestead and whether James would ever come back from the East. They talked about Samuel's talent with horses and whether he might start a horse breeding operation. They talked about Grace's music and the younger children's education. They talked about expanding the ranch, about buying more cattle, about maybe building a new barn. But mostly they just sat together, holding hands, being present with each other. This was what marriage was, Margaret thought. Not just the big moments, the weddings and births and celebrations. But these quiet, ordinary moments, sitting on a porch with the person you loved, talking about nothing and everything, comfortable in the silence and the togetherness. As the years continued to pass, the rhythm of their life became familiar and cherished. Spring brought calving season and planting. Summer meant long days of work in the fields and tending cattle. Fall was roundup and harvest and preparing for winter. Winter was a time of rest, of shorter days and longer nights, of family gathered around the fire telling stories and playing games. Margaret's hair started to show gray, and Cole's face became more lined with age and weather. But they were still strong, still healthy, still working side by side to build their legacy. William had 3 children of his own now, making Margaret a grandmother. James came back from the East with a teaching certificate and a wife, settling in Abilene to teach at the school there. Samuel married a ranch girl from down the valley and started his horse breeding operation on a corner of Cole's land. Grace met a young man at church, a banker's son who loved her music, and married him in a beautiful ceremony that had Margaret crying happy tears. Daniel, Emma, and Caroline were growing into young adults, each finding their own path. Daniel wanted to stay on the ranch to eventually take over from Cole when he retired. Emma wanted to be a nurse, inspired by helping Mrs. Patterson tend to sick neighbors. Caroline wanted to travel, to see more of the world than just their corner of Kansas. Margaret supported all of them in their dreams, even when those dreams took them away from her. She had learned that love meant letting go, allowing her children to become who they were meant to be rather than who she wanted them to be. It was hard, but it was necessary. In 1895, Margaret and Cole celebrated 21 years of marriage. Their children threw them a party, gathering from all their various homes to celebrate. The house was full of noise and laughter and love, 3 generations gathered together. Margaret looked around at her family, at the children and grandchildren, at Cole standing in the middle of it all with a smile on his weathered face, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what they had built together. Not just a ranch or a house, but a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Their children would have children, who would have children of their own, and the love that Margaret and Cole had created would ripple outward through generations. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Margaret and Cole lay in bed together, holding hands in the darkness. "That was a good day," Cole said contentedly. "It was," Margaret agreed. "I am so proud of our family. Look at what we have built, Cole." From that day in the store to this, it is almost unbelievable. "But we did it," Cole said. "Together, that is the key, Margaret. We did it together." Margaret thought about that word, together. It summed up everything, really. They had faced every challenge together, celebrated every victory together, raised their children together, built their ranch and their life together. Neither of them could have done it alone. It was the partnership, the love, the commitment to each other that made everything possible. "I love you," Margaret said, the words simple but containing everything she felt. "I love you too," Cole replied. "Always have, always will." They drifted off to sleep, still holding hands as they had done for over 20 years, as they would continue to do for all the years to come. Margaret lived to see her children all settled and happy, lived to hold great-grandchildren in her arms, lived to see the ranch prosper beyond anything she had imagined that desperate day in Abilene. She and Cole grew old together, their hair white and their faces lined, but their love never wavered. They sat on their porch every evening until Cole's health began to fail, and then Margaret sat beside his bed, holding his hand just as she had held Thomas's hand so many years before. But that was much later, in the fullness of time. For now, in this moment, they were simply Margaret and Cole Brennan, husband and wife, partners and lovers and friends. They had taken a chance on each other when both of them desperately needed someone to believe in, and they had built something beautiful and lasting from that leap of faith. The ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Cole's reputation as a fair and honorable rancher grew, and people came from miles around to buy his cattle and horses. Margaret became known for her hospitality, for the way she welcomed neighbors and strangers alike, for her wisdom and kindness. They were respected members of their community, people who had worked hard and built something from nothing. But more than the material success, more than the land and cattle and prosperity, what they had built was love. Love that had started with a simple act of kindness, with a cowboy buying a widow's wedding ring and giving it back. Love that had grown and deepened through years of shared labor and shared joy and shared sorrow. Love that had created a family and a legacy that would endure. When Margaret was 65, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch with Cole beside her, watching their youngest grandchildren play in the yard, she thought back to that terrified young widow standing in Pritchard's general store. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that the darkness she was in was not permanent, that light was coming in the form of a kind stranger who would change her life forever. But maybe that woman had needed to go through the darkness to truly appreciate the light. Maybe the struggle was what made the victory so sweet. Maybe she had needed to lose everything to understand how to value what she was given. Margaret reached over and took Cole's hand as she had done thousands of times over their years together. He squeezed back, a gentle pressure that spoke of love and commitment and all the years they had shared. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, always attuned to her moods. "That day in the store," Margaret said. "The day you bought my ring, the The day my life changed. Cole smiled, his face creasing in familiar lines. The day both our lives changed. I walked into that store a lonely drifter, and I walked out having met the woman who would become my whole world. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Margaret asked. "You said you wanted to do one good thing that day." "I remember," Cole said, "but I was wrong. It was not one good thing. It was the beginning of a lifetime of good things. Marrying you, raising our children, building this ranch, growing old with you. All of it started with that moment, but it has been so much more than I ever imagined." Margaret looked at their joined hands, at the gold and silver rings on her finger that represented two great loves, at the lines and age spots that marked their years together. She thought about everything they had been through, all the challenges and triumphs, the losses and gains, the ordinary days and the extraordinary moments. "I would not change a single thing," she said quietly. "Even the hard parts, the pain and the struggle. It all led to this life we have built. I would do it all again exactly the same way. Even selling your ring," Cole teased gently. Margaret smiled. "Especially selling my ring, because it brought you into my life and you brought me everything else." They sat together as the sun set, painting the Kansas sky in shades of gold and orange and pink. The ranch stretched out around them, the home they had built, the land they had tended, the legacy they would leave behind. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across the property and beyond, living their own lives but always connected by the bonds of family. Margaret thought about the journey that had brought her here, from desperate widow to respected matriarch. She thought about Thomas, who would always hold a place in her heart, and about Cole, who had given her a second chance at love and life. She thought about her children, all of them, biological and stepchildren, and how love made no distinction between them. Most of all, she thought about the power of kindness, of one good act rippling outward to create waves of change. Cole had bought her ring and given it back, a simple gesture that contained profound meaning. He had seen her worth when she felt worthless, had offered help when she was too proud to ask, had loved her when she thought she could never love again. That was the real story, Margaret thought. Not the struggles or the hardships, not the material success or the legacy. The real story was about love. Love that persevered through loss, love that built rather than destroyed, love that grew stronger with time rather than fading. Love that started with an act of grace and continued through a lifetime of commitment. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, Margaret and Cole rose from their chairs and went inside, arms around each other, still together after all these years. The house welcomed them with warmth and light, with the familiar comfort of home, with the knowledge that they belonged here together. And in the quiet of the night, if anyone had been listening, they might have heard Margaret whisper a prayer of gratitude for the cowboy who had walked into her life when she needed him most, for the love they had built together, for the second chance she had been given and had seized with both hands. Their story was a testament to the resilience of the human heart, to the power of kindness to change lives, to the truth that love could bloom even in the harshest conditions. From a desperate moment in a dusty general store in Abilene, Kansas in 1873, had grown a love story that spanned decades, a family that stretched across generations, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Margaret Coleman Brennan had started as a widow selling her wedding ring for food. She had become a wife again, a mother to many children, a grandmother and great-grandmother, a rancher's partner, a pillar of her community. But most importantly, she had become a woman who knew that love was always possible, that second chances existed, that grace could come in unexpected forms. And it had all started with a cowboy who chose to do one good thing, who bought a ring and gave it back, who saw a woman in need and offered help without judgment or expectation. That single act of kindness had changed two lives, had created a family, had built a legacy. That was the true Wild West story, Margaret thought as she drifted off to sleep beside her husband. Not tales of gunfights and outlaws and lawlessness, but stories of ordinary people surviving and thriving, of kindness in hard times, of love growing in unlikely places. Stories of people like her and Cole, who took what little they had and built something lasting and good. And as she slept, her hand still clasped in Cole's, Margaret smiled, content in the knowledge that she had lived a life worth living, had loved and been loved in return, had taken her second chance and made something beautiful from it. The widow who had sold her wedding ring had found not just survival, but joy. Not just existence, but purpose. Not just loneliness, but love that would last forever. The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges, more moments of joy and sorrow. But through it all, Margaret and Cole would face them together, their love a constant in a changing world. They would watch more grandchildren be born, would celebrate more weddings, would weather more storms, both literal and figurative. And when their time finally came, when they passed from this world having lived long, full lives, their children and grandchildren would gather to remember them. They would tell the story of how Margaret and Cole met, of the widow selling her ring and the cowboy who bought it and gave it back. They would tell of the love that grew from that meeting, of the family that was built, of the legacy that endured. It would become a family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that love could come when you least expected it, that kindness mattered, that second chances were real. And future generations would look at the two rings that Margaret had worn her whole life, gold and silver side by side, and understand that love was not something you only got once. Love was something that could come again and again in different forms if you were brave enough to open your heart to it. That was the lesson Margaret and Cole left behind. Not just land and cattle and material wealth, but the understanding that love was the greatest legacy anyone could leave. Love that nurtured and sustained, love that built up rather than tore down, love that endured through hardship and celebrated in triumph. From a desperate moment in a dusty Kansas town had come a love story for the ages, a testament to human resilience and the power of kindness. The widow had sold her ring, and the cowboy had bought it and given it back, and from that simple transaction had grown something magnificent and enduring. And that, in the end, was everything.